Judge ordered the granddaughter to be taken away from an elderly woman, but when the little girl started to speak, the sun cast its golden rays over the small suburban neighborhood of Maple Grove, illuminating the modest single-story house where Helen Carter lived with her granddaughter Lily. The sound of birds chirping blended with the hum of a distant lawnmower as Helen sipped her morning coffee on the front porch. Inside, Lily was sprawled across the living room floor, coloring in a sketchbook. Her giggles filled the air as their golden retriever, Max, nudged her arm, seeking attention. This was their routine, a life filled with love and simplicity. Since her parents, Claire and Andrew, had moved to Japan for work 3 years ago, Helen had become both mother and grandmother to Lily. At 65, Helen's days revolved around ensuring Lily had everything she needed. Though money was tight, love overflowed in their home. But that peaceful morning took a sharp turn when Helen heard the sound of a car pulling up. She peered out the window to see a sleek black sedan parked in her driveway. 2 sharply dressed individuals stepped out, holding briefcases. Helen's stomach churned as she opened the door to greet them. "Mrs. Carter," one of the men began, handing her an envelope. "You've been served." Helen's hands trembled as she opened the envelope, her eyes scanning the legal jargon. It was a petition for custody. Lily's uncle Edgar and his wife, Marina, wealthy relatives from Boston, were suing for full custody of the girl. Their argument was clear. Helen's modest income and age were insufficient to provide for Lily's future. Edgar's letter stated that Lily deserved access to better schools, a more affluent environment, and broader opportunities. The words hit Helen like a punch to the gut. She clutched the paper, struggling to steady her breath. "Grandma?" Lily's soft voice came from behind her. She stood in the doorway, her sketchbook in hand, concern etched on her face. Helen forced a smile. "It's nothing, sweetheart. Go finish your drawing. I'll be right there." Lily hesitated before retreating inside, leaving Helen to collapse into the porch chair. 1,000 thoughts raced through her mind. How could Edgar and Marina, who barely visited, think they had the right to take Lily away? Helen knew they lived in luxury, with a sprawling mansion and private school connections, but they didn't know Lily. Not her favorite bedtime story, her passion for art, or how she danced around the kitchen when baking cookies. Determined, Helen called her close friend and neighbor, Susan. "This can't be happening," Helen said, her voice trembling. "They can't just take her from me." "You've raised that girl with more love than anyone could," Susan replied firmly. "We'll fight this, Helen. You're not alone." That night, Helen sat with Lily on the couch, reading her favorite book, Anne of Green Gables. Lily leaned her head against Helen's shoulder, her laughter erupting at the funny parts. Helen tried to push aside her fears, but the thought of losing moments like these kept her awake long after Lily had gone to bed. The following days were a blur of lawyer meetings and court filings. Helen hired a local attorney, Marcus Fields, who reassured her that the case wasn't as open and shut as Edgar and Marina seemed to believe. "They may have money," Marcus said, "but family law is about the child's best interests. You've been Lily's primary caregiver. That counts for a lot." Still, Helen couldn't shake her anxiety. Edgar's legal team was formidable, and their resources seemed endless. Meanwhile, news of the custody battle began to spread through Maple Grove. At the grocery store, neighbors stopped Helen to offer words of encouragement. Lily's school principal called to express support, praising Helen's dedication to Lily's education. The weight of the battle took its toll. Late one night, Helen sat at the kitchen table, poring over financial documents. Bills were piling up, and the cost of legal fees loomed over her. But then she glanced at the refrigerator, where Lily's crayon drawing of the 2 of them hung proudly. In bold, colorful letters, it read, "Me and Grandma, best friends forever." That simple drawing gave Helen strength. 1 week later, Helen attended the first court hearing. The courtroom felt cold and formal, a stark contrast to the warmth of her home. Across the room sat Edgar and Marina, their polished appearances a reminder of the stark difference in their lives. Edgar's lawyer, a man with a commanding presence, wasted no time laying out their case. Helen was too old, too poor, and incapable of providing the better life Lily deserved. Helen clenched her fists under the table. When it was her turn to speak, she rose, her voice trembling but firm. "I may not have the money Edgar and Marina do," she said, her eyes briefly meeting Lily's across the room. "But I've given Lily a home full of love and stability. She knows she's safe with me. She knows she's cared for." Though her words resonated with some in the courtroom, Helen could feel the weight of the uphill battle. As the hearing ended, Edgar approached her in the hallway. "This isn't personal, Helen," he said, his tone almost condescending. "We just want what's best for Lily." Helen looked him square in the eye. "Then leave her where she's happiest, with me." As she walked away, her resolve only strengthened. No matter how many hearings, how much scrutiny, or how intimidating the fight became, Helen knew one thing for certain: she wasn't giving up. The sun barely rose over Maple Grove when Helen received a knock at her door. She opened it to find Susan, her closest friend, holding a casserole dish and wearing a determined expression. "You're not facing this alone," Susan said, setting the dish on Helen's kitchen counter. "I've already talked to the PTA, the church, and a few neighbors. Everyone agrees it's outrageous what Edgar and Marina are trying to do." Helen felt a lump in her throat. For so long, she'd fought her battles quietly, not wanting to burden others. But this was different. Later that day, Helen walked Lily to school. As they reached the entrance, the principal, Mrs. Baxter, approached. "Mrs. Carter, I heard about what's happening," she said warmly. "Lily is one of our brightest students, and it's clear how much love and support she gets at home. If there's anything the school can do, please let me know." Helen nodded, touched by the offer. "Thank you, Mrs. Baxter. That means more than you know." Word of the custody battle spread quickly through Maple Grove. Helen was surprised and deeply moved by the outpouring of support. A group of parents at the school organized a bake sale to help her cover legal fees. The church held a special service where the pastor spoke about the importance of family and community. Neighbors dropped by with meals, offers to babysit, and heartfelt words of encouragement. But while the town rallied behind her, Edgar and Marina intensified their efforts. A private investigator hired by Edgar began showing up in the neighborhood, asking questions about Helen's parenting. One afternoon, Helen spotted the man parked outside her house, snapping photos as she and Lily played catch in the yard. She walked over, her heart pounding. "Can I help you?" she asked sharply. The man smirked. "Just doing my job." Helen glared at him. "Then you can do it somewhere else. Leave us alone." Inside, Lily noticed her grandmother's distress. "Grandma, is something wrong?" Helen knelt beside her. "No, sweetheart. Everything's fine." But her mind was racing. She needed to stay strong, for both of them. A week later, the community hosted a town hall meeting at the local library. Dozens of people showed up to express their support for Helen. Susan stood at the front, her voice passionate. "Helen Carter has been a pillar of this community for decades," she said. "She's raised Lily with more love and care than money could ever buy. We can't let some rich outsiders come in and tear them apart." Applause filled the room. Several people stepped up to share stories of how Helen had helped them over the years, watching their children when they were sick, baking pies for fundraisers, and always being there with a kind word or a listening ear. Marcus, Helen's attorney, was there too. He leaned over and whispered, "This kind of support can make a big difference in court. Judges care about the child's environment, and it's clear Lily has a strong one here." For the first time in weeks, Helen felt a flicker of hope, but the pressure continued to mount. Edgar and Marina made their first public statement, giving an interview to a Boston news outlet. "We only want what's best for Lily," Edgar said, seated in a sleek office. "Helen has done her best, but we believe we can offer Lily opportunities she'd never have otherwise." The segment included footage of Edgar and Marina's lavish home, complete with a private tennis court and an Olympic-sized pool. It was a stark contrast to Helen's modest house. Watching the broadcast, Helen felt a pang of doubt. How could she compete with that? But as she turned off the TV, she heard Lily's voice from the dining room. "Grandma, look." Lily held up a picture she'd drawn of the two of them at the park. "I'm going to hang this on the fridge." Helen smiled, her resolve returning. "That's beautiful, sweetheart." The next day, Helen received a surprise visit from Mrs. Baxter, the principal. "I thought you might want to see this," Mrs. Baxter said, handing Helen a folder. Inside were letters written by Lily's classmates and teachers, all describing what an amazing grandmother Helen was. "She talks about you all the time," Mrs. Baxter added. "How you help her with homework, how you always cheer the loudest at her school plays. These letters are just a small way for us to show our support." Tears welled in Helen's eyes as she read the letters. One from Lily's art teacher described how Helen had helped nurture Lily's love of drawing by encouraging her to enter a local art contest. Another from a classmate talked about how Lily always brought cookies to share, baked with her grandmother. "These will be powerful in court," Marcus said when Helen showed him the letters. "They prove that Lily has a stable, loving home life." As the days turned into weeks, Helen's confidence grew. She knew the fight wasn't over, but she also knew she wasn't alone. The community of Maple Grove had rallied behind her, showing her that love and support could overcome even the most daunting challenges. And as Helen tucked Lily into bed that night, reading her a story about bravery and resilience, she silently promised herself, no matter what Edgar and Marina threw at her, she would fight with everything she had. The day of the courtroom showdown had arrived. Helen sat in the courtroom, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, her breath shallow as she waited for the proceedings to begin. Across the aisle, Edgar and Marina sat composed and confident, their lawyer whispering last-minute advice. The tension in the room was palpable, and Helen couldn't help but glance at Lily, seated a few rows back with Susan. Lily offered her grandmother a small, reassuring smile. It was the kind of smile that reminded Helen why she was fighting so hard. The court was called to order, and Edgar's lawyer launched into his opening statement. "Your Honor, this case is about giving a child the life she deserves. My clients, Edgar and Marina Walker, can provide Lily with access to the best schools, cultural experiences, and financial stability. While we acknowledge Helen Carter's efforts, it's clear that Lily's potential would be better nurtured in an environment of greater opportunity." Helen's heart sank. The lawyer's words were smooth and calculated, designed to paint her as incapable. But Marcus, her lawyer, was ready. "This case isn't about material wealth, Your Honor," Marcus began. "It's about stability, love, and what's in the best interest of the child. Lily has spent the past 3 years thriving under her grandmother's care. She's happy, healthy, and deeply connected to her community. No amount of money can replace that." As the hearing progressed, Edgar's team called a series of witnesses: a private investigator who testified about Helen's modest lifestyle, a child psychologist hired by the Walkers who suggested Lily would benefit from a more structured and affluent environment, and even a financial planner who detailed Helen's limited savings. Helen felt her shoulders sag with each blow, but when it was her turn, Marcus began to call witnesses of his own. The first was Mrs. Baxter, Lily's school principal. "Lily is one of our brightest and most well-adjusted students," Mrs. Baxter said confidently. "She consistently excels in her studies, participates in extracurricular activities, and is a joy to have at school. It's clear she comes from a loving, supportive home." Next came Susan, who recounted stories of Helen's dedication. "I've known Helen for over 20 years, Susan said, her voice steady. "She's the kind of person who would give you the coat off her back. She's raised Lily with so much love, and it shows in everything that little girl does." Finally, it was Lily's turn to testify. Helen's stomach churned as her granddaughter walked to the stand. At just 10 years old, Lily seemed so small and fragile in the towering courtroom. But when she sat down and faced the judge, her voice was clear and confident. "Lily," the judge began, his tone gentle, "can you tell us how you feel about living with your grandmother?" Lily nodded. "I love living with Grandma. She makes me feel safe and happy. We do everything together, cooking, drawing, reading. She always listens to me and helps me with my homework." Edgar's lawyer leaned forward, his tone soft but pointed. "Lily, don't you think it would be exciting to live in a big house with a pool, to go to a school where you could learn new languages and travel the world?" Lily hesitated for a moment, then shook her head. "I like my school now. My friends are there, and my teachers are nice, and I don't need a big house. I just want to be with Grandma." Helen's chest swelled with pride as Lily continued. "She's always there for me, even when things are hard. When my parents moved to Japan, I was really sad, but Grandma helped me feel better. She's my best friend." The courtroom fell silent, the weight of Lily's words hanging in the air. Even Edgar and Marina appeared taken aback. During a recess, Helen and Lily sat together in a quiet corner of the courthouse. "You were amazing, sweetheart," Helen said, her voice thick with emotion. Lily shrugged. "I just told the truth. I love you, Grandma." Helen hugged her tightly, tears streaming down her face. For the first time in weeks, she felt a glimmer of hope. As the hearing resumed, Marcus capitalized on Lily's testimony, emphasizing the deep bond between grandmother and granddaughter. He highlighted the letters from Lily's classmates and teachers, the support of the community, and the consistent, loving environment Helen had provided. By the end of the day, the courtroom atmosphere had shifted. The judge announced he needed more time to deliberate, but the emotional impact of Lily's testimony was clear. That evening, as Helen and Lily returned home, they found a small crowd waiting outside their house. Friends, neighbors, and even Lily's teachers had gathered, holding signs that read, "We stand with Helen and keep Lily at home." Helen's eyes filled with tears as she hugged Susan. "I don't know what I'd do without all of you." Susan smiled. "We're not letting them take her away, Helen, not without a fight." As Lily ran off to play with Max in the yard, Helen watched her with a sense of renewed determination. The fight wasn't over, but Helen knew she wasn't fighting alone, and that made all the difference. Helen's nerves were frayed as she sat in the courtroom once again. The custody case had dragged on for weeks, and with every passing day the pressure mounted. Marcus assured her they were building a strong case, but Edgar and Marina's relentless legal team made it clear they were in this to win. Today was supposed to be a pivotal day. Witness testimonies had concluded, and both sides were preparing to make their final arguments. Helen tried to steady her breath, glancing over at Lily, who sat quietly in the gallery with Susan. As the session began, Edgar's lawyer launched into his closing statement, reiterating their case. "Your Honor, this isn't about discrediting Mrs. Carter's love for Lily. We acknowledge her efforts," he said, his tone measured. "But love alone cannot guarantee a child's future. Mr. and Mrs. Walker have the means to provide Lily with a life of comfort, opportunity, and security that Mrs. Carter simply cannot match." Helen clenched her fists under the table. She wanted to shout that Lily didn't need luxury, she needed love. But she remained silent, waiting for Marcus to respond. Before Marcus could begin, the courtroom doors opened, drawing everyone's attention. Helen turned and froze. Walking down the aisle, with hurried yet purposeful strides, were Claire and Andrew, Lily's parents. Gasps rippled through the room as the couple approached the judge. "Your Honor," Claire began, her voice steady despite the tension in the room, "we'd like to present new evidence before this case concludes." The judge raised an eyebrow, but gestured for them to proceed. Claire held up a USB drive. "This is a video we've prepared from Japan explaining why my mother, Helen Carter, is the best person to raise our daughter. We've also included additional details that we believe the court should consider." Edgar and Marina exchanged uneasy glances, but they remained silent as the judge called for the video to be played. The courtroom lights dimmed, and the screen at the front flickered to life. The video opened with Claire and Andrew sitting side by side in a bright, cheerful room. "Hello, Your Honor, and everyone in the courtroom," Claire began, her expression sincere. "We've been following this case from Japan, and we felt it was time to speak up. We want to tell you about my mother, Helen Carter, and why we entrusted her with the care of our daughter." Andrew continued. "When we moved to Japan, it was one of the hardest decisions we ever made. We knew it meant leaving Lily in someone else's care, but we also knew that Helen was the best choice. She's the kind of person who puts others first, who sacrifices for her family without a second thought." The video then shifted to clips of Helen and Lily together, laughing in the kitchen, playing board games and reading stories on the couch. The images were accompanied by narration from Claire and Andrew, describing Helen's dedication and love. "Lily doesn't just have a caretaker," Claire said, her voice breaking slightly. "She has a home, she has stability, and most importantly, she has unconditional love." Then, the tone of the video shifted. Claire's voice grew firmer. "We also feel it's important to address some concerns about Edgar and Marina's intentions." Andrew chimed in. "We've recently discovered emails between Edgar and his lawyer that suggests this custody case may be motivated by more than just concern for Lily's well-being. There are financial interests tied to a trust fund set up by my late father, which Edgar would gain partial control of if he became Lily's legal guardian. The courtroom erupted in whispers. Edgar's face flushed red as he leaned over to whisper angrily to his lawyer. Marina, wide-eyed, stared straight ahead, clearly caught off guard by the revelation. Helen sat frozen, her heart pounding. She had always suspected Edgar's motives weren't entirely pure, but hearing it confirmed was both shocking and vindicating. The video concluded with Claire's final plea. "Your Honor, we trust my mother with Lily's life because she's proven time and again that her love and care are what Lily needs most. We respectfully ask the court to see what we've always known, that Helen Carter is the best person to raise our daughter." When the video ended, the courtroom was silent. The judge looked toward Edgar and Marina, his expression unreadable. "Mr. and Mrs. Walker," he said, his tone sharp, "do you have anything to say about these allegations?" Edgar stammered, his polished demeanor cracking. "Your Honor, this is a misunderstanding." The judge held up a hand. "We'll address this matter later. For now, let's proceed with the case." After the session adjourned for the day, Helen approached Claire and Andrew in the hallway. She pulled them into a tight hug, tears streaming down her face. "You came," she whispered. "Of course we did, Mom," Claire said. "We couldn't let you face this alone." Lily ran to her parents, wrapping her arms around them. "Mom! Dad!" The reunion was emotional, but there wasn't time to celebrate. The judge had scheduled one final day of proceedings to review the new evidence, and the tension was higher than ever. That evening, as Helen sat with her family in her small living room, she felt a surge of hope. For the first time, it felt like the truth was finally on her side. Whatever came next, she knew she wasn't alone, and that made her stronger than ever. The courtroom was unusually quiet as the final day of the custody hearing began. Helen sat at her table, flanked by Marcus and Claire, her heart pounding in anticipation. Lily sat in the gallery with Andrew and Susan, her small hands clasped tightly in her lap. Across the room, Edgar and Marina wore expressions of forced composure, but the cracks in their confidence were visible. The judge, an older man with a stern yet fair demeanor, called the proceedings to order. "After reviewing all testimony and evidence, I am prepared to make a decision," he began, his voice echoing through the room. Before the judge could continue, Marina unexpectedly stood up, her voice trembling. "Your Honor, may I speak?" she asked, her gaze darting nervously between Edgar and the judge. The judge frowned but nodded. "Proceed." Marina took a deep breath, stepping forward. "I can't go through with this without telling the truth. Edgar and I, we thought we were doing the right thing, but—" her voice broke. "But the truth is, I don't know Lily. I don't know what she loves, what makes her happy. I thought giving her a bigger house and more money would make up for that, but now I see it doesn't." "Marina!" Edgar hissed, his face flushing with anger. Marina ignored him. "Helen has given Lily something we can't, a real home. And I'm sorry for trying to take that away." The courtroom erupted in murmurs. Edgar looked furious, but Marina's words seemed to hang heavily in the air. The judge tapped his gavel for silence. "Thank you, Mrs. Walker. Is there anything further?" Marina shook her head and returned to her seat, her eyes fixed on her hands. The judge leaned forward, his expression thoughtful. "This case has been complex, with compelling arguments on both sides. Ultimately, my decision rests on what is in Lily's best interest, her emotional well-being, stability, and happiness." Helen held her breath, her hands trembling in her lap. "It is clear to this court that Lily has a deeply loving and supportive relationship with her grandmother, Helen Carter. The testimonies of the community, Lily herself and her parents, have demonstrated that this bond is irreplaceable. While financial resources are a factor, they are not the sole determinant of a child's well-being." The judge paused, his gaze moving between the two parties. "Therefore, I am ruling in favor of Helen Carter. Full custody of Lily will remain with her grandmother." Helen's hand flew to her mouth, tears streaming down her face as relief and gratitude washed over her. Lily leapt from her seat and ran to her grandmother, wrapping her arms tightly around her. "Grandma, we did it," Lily cried, her voice muffled against Helen's shoulder. The courtroom erupted in applause from Helen's supporters. Susan hugged Claire and Andrew, while Marcus gave Helen a reassuring pat on the back. As the room emptied, Edgar approached Helen, his expression a mix of defeat and regret. Marina stood behind him, looking hesitant but sincere. I don't know what to say, Edgar began. I thought I was doing the right thing, but I see now I was wrong. I'm sorry for everything we put you through. Helen studied him for a moment before nodding. What matters is that Lily is happy. If you want to be a part of her life, it has to be on her terms, and with love, not control. Marina stepped forward. We'd like to start over if you'll let us. I don't want to be a stranger to Lily anymore. Helen softened. We'll take it one step at a time. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of healing and rebuilding. Edgar and Marina began visiting Maple Grove regularly, making genuine efforts to bond with Lily. Their transformation was slow but steady, marked by moments of vulnerability and self-reflection. Meanwhile, Claire and Andrew made a life-changing decision. They were returning to the US for good. We've missed so much, Claire admitted, as she helped Helen pack up Lily's room in preparation for their new home. It's time for us to be a family again. Helen felt a bittersweet pang. She would miss the daily rhythms of raising Lily, but knowing they would all be together brought her peace. Months later, the family gathered in Helen's living room for a special occasion. Lily had completed a short film project for school, a documentary about their custody battle and the strength of their family. As the video played, showcasing interviews with Helen, Claire, Andrew, and even Edgar and Marina, there wasn't a dry eye in the room. Lily's closing words echoed with wisdom beyond her years. Family isn't about how much money you have or how big your house is. It's about love, and love is something my grandma taught me every single day. The video ended to applause and laughter, and Helen pulled Lily close, her heart swelling with pride. You're going to do amazing things, my sweet girl, Helen said. And I'll always have you to thank, Grandma, Lily replied. As the night wore on, the once fractured family sat together, sharing stories, laughter, and hope for the future. Helen looked around the room, her heart full. The journey had been hard, but it had brought them closer than ever. Love, she realized, had won in the end.